The long arm of Uncle Sam is getting longer. This time, Washington has issued a chilling warning to the world: stay away from Huawei chips or else. On Monday, on May the 12th, the Bureau of Industry and Security under the U.S. Commerce Department issued guidance, just friendly guidance, stating that using Huawei's most advanced AI chips, quote unquote, anywhere in the world may be in violation of U.S. export controls. China immediately condemned the move, vowing to take resolute measures to protect the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies. Days later, the U.S. removed the line about anywhere in the world, but still warns, quote unquote, all persons and companies in the U.S. and abroad against using PRC-produced advanced chips. What does this move mean for businesses and the AI sector around the world? Will it succeed in containing China's development, or has that train already left the station? And how can companies respond to Washington's latest threats and intimidation? Welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. Joining me from Pittsburgh, the U.S., is Anthony Moretti, Associate Professor at Robert Morris University. From the Chinese capital, Zhang Fan, Associate Professor at Beijing Normal University. From New York, Santosh Rao, Head of Research and Partner at Manhattan Venture Partners. And from Bangkok, Thailand, Jeffrey Towson, Partner at Tech Mode Consulting. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. Professor Anthony Moretti, let me go to you first. Again, Huawei in the spotlight after the row over its 5G stations years ago. Why Huawei again, and why specifically the Ascend chip series?
This has a feel of, yet again, the U.S. acting under a kind of, oh, the horse has left the barn, I think we better do something right now. And like most cases, when you react in those kinds of situations, you tend to either act out of panic or you make decisions that are very short-sighted. And I think that's what we're seeing in this case.
Professor Zhang, tell us about your understanding of the current tension with Huawei. And what about the Ascend chips? Exactly what are these chips? What are they capable of doing that the U.S. is so afraid of?
Right. So the Ascend chips are the most advanced Huawei chips for AI purposes. They're called graphic chips, but they're not really for graphic reasons anymore. They even have sockets for that. And they're basically replacement for the NVIDIA chips that's been banned under Biden administration for Chinese AI models to use. And the reason why they're targeting these chips, and especially Huawei, is because Huawei has been really fast in coming up with this replacement, and it's 80% of the Chinese domestic sort of AI chip market is being cornered by this particular chip. And the particular reason why this come up recently is because NVIDIA's CEO actually mentioned openly that Huawei is coming up as a serious competitor that would really potentially undermine NVIDIA's dominant position in the market, which is why I think the U.S. feels the need to do something to like cut it down before anything bad happens to them.
Professor, Mr. Rao, Mr. Santosh Rao, is that your understanding of why Huawei is particularly mentioned here and why the measure is announced by the BIS at this particular juncture? Specifically, what is BIS warning companies in the United States and abroad against doing?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Well, I think I agree with everything that was just said. I think Huawei has a big target behind its back. It's one of the biggest one, and it's a direct competitor to NVIDIA, so to speak. I think they were coming around with, they had workarounds NVIDIA's chips that were banned, so they were developing it very fast, and they're in a race. Well, this is a race to the top, and Huawei is definitely a big player. And so I think they want to really control that. And in the end, I think what's going to happen is we've seen with the DeepSeek, what DeepSeek showed is that you can do so much more with less. You can ban stuff, but you can do a lot with less. You don't need the most powerful chips that NVIDIA has. So even with Huawei developing their chip line, I think what US wants to do is, hey, stop them right there and work and essentially slow down the progress. You really can't do that. China is a powerful player. They have the expertise. They can do whatever. It's just going to delay the whole process. And that's where we are at this point. They will catch up. They will go ahead as well if US doesn't keep its competitive edge. And that's what they want to do. They want to blunt the edge that or want to slow them down. And that's where we are. So Huawei is the right target to focus on for US because they are a big player and they're doing a great job with bypassing the restrictions that US imposed after with the NVIDIA ban.
Jeffrey Towson here in Bangkok. The BIS's justification for the enforcement actions that companies and persons may face, including imprisonment, fines, and losing export license, is that the Huawei chips, the Ascent chips, may have been produced with the help of embargoed US technology or chips. Thus, there is a high probability that Huawei may have, or the people who help Huawei produce these chips may have broken US export regulations. Therefore, anybody who use these chips will be subject to punishment. Can the BIS justify its latest policy in this way?
Yeah, I think the arguments, rationales, they're pretty shallow. I think this is just a free-for-all. I think the Trump administration in particular, but parts of the US government, they have an objective relating to China's development. They're going after it. They will point to whatever regulation kind of makes sense, but it's pretty shallow as an argument. Now, the one argument I would sort of maybe disagree with a little bit that's been said is, I don't think the targeting of Huawei in particular has blunted the edge. I think it's actually accelerated it. 5 years ago, NVIDIA had no major competitor. Not in China, not in the US, well, not in Asia. Now they do. Huawei is a significant competitor in AI chips. And the US government kind of created this. Like, it wasn't going to happen like this otherwise. It was sort of the mother of necessity. Or invention being the mother of necessity. I mean, it just sort of happened. The result may not be matching the intent with these actions, and you do get the sense that they're not super well thought through in the longer term. Maybe short term, pretty good. Long term, unclear to me at least.
Professor Anthony Moretti, what do you think of the apparent step back? Because in the beginning, the BIS said any companies or persons anywhere in the world may face enforcement actions, may be punished, to be specific. Whereas later, a couple of days later, that anywhere in the world is taken back, but it still warns all persons and companies in the US and abroad. Is there a change in substance of this policy statement?
Anything having to do with the Trump administration, I think sometimes you throw your hands in the air and go, maybe. But we have seen this bold statement, especially from him, often on social media, but sometimes with, the White House press corps in front of him. And there'll be this loud, demonstrative series of claims, and 24, 48 hours later, there will be a less bold, less high-profile step back. So I think this is just the latest in yet another example. Tariffs is certainly the one that generates the most attention, especially in the business community. But if you look at higher education, for example, there were a whole host of threats made against higher education institutions. The courts are now slowing down the roll of some of those. So again, this looks to be nothing more than, as was just mentioned a couple of seconds ago, programs or policies that are not well thought out. There appears to be a decision made, whether it's in anger or in haste or in frustration, and simple common sense tells you those kinds of decisions almost always will backfire. So yet again, here's the Trump administration trying to quietly roll back on something. But again, the critics are realizing you're doing this again and again and again, and the trust of the U.S. around the world erodes a little bit more every time that happens.
Professor Chang, what can we make of this? Because, yeah, again, there was, some people say there's even a typo in that statement in mixing inference with interference. I'm not a tech aficionado, so I can't judge upon that. But certainly, this is creating confusion. What kind of impact is this kind of announcement, which is changed just days later, having on the industry, on businesses in the US and elsewhere who are, waiting for some kind of certain signals of where to go in the future?
Right. It very precisely portrayed a very uncertain environment. If you see the exodus from the US, then that reflects that's just part of it. In particular, the wording, sort of anywhere in the word, it sounds like it's written by a 12-year-old. It's unprofessional, which is maybe one of the reasons why it's taken out. Another is that it sounds like a threat towards third party, not even Chinese, not even Huawei. So that may have some blowback from people. But that also reflects the fact there is a real underlying risk because the arbitrariness and the long arm sort of nature of these regulations. If you do business with the US, you may randomly get arrested for you don't even know why. And that really has becoming a more of a problem with the Trump administration sort of putting out more of these regulations and having to change them all the time.
There is actually one sentence, and that's one phrase that's used repeatedly in the guide, that appears repeatedly in the guidance, is persons or companies with the knowledge of, and the definition is very broad. It seems like I don't know, anybody who is doing business in this field would just not touch it, right? Because you don't know at which point, at which juncture you may have violated some sort of US regulation or policy statement. Mr. Santosh Rao, how do you look at the vagueness and the apparent extent of the scope this kind of policy is trying to cover? And what kind of effect is it having on businesses who are already operating in a very complex situation?
Yes, it's definitely not a very constructive process right now, what he's doing. It's not good for business. The uncertainty that it causes, it disrupts innovation, it disrupts progress. So this is typically Trump's shock and awe style of functioning. He wants to put the chill out there. He puts out everything and then backs off. So I think what this is going to do is people are going to be careful. There have been loopholes. Companies have been abusing the embargoes and all that stuff. So I think he wants to close that loophole. He wants to get that satisfaction. But in the end, businesses will get what they want. I mean, technology is, in a way, you cannot really control IP. It's really, you can move around it in different ways. You can do the same thing more than one way. Maybe US will have an edge in terms of speed of innovation, but other countries will catch up very fast. So technology, we saw that with 5G and all that. When they started putting restrictions, China came around it and did their own thing. So they're also moving way ahead. They're in step with the Western world. So things like that, I think in the end, there will be a small case of disruption and caution and slowing down and reading the fine print. But in the end, they'll come around to it. And innovation is required. AI is big. Quantum computing is big. Everybody wants to get hold of that. So you will see companies will move around, will get access to this thing, but in a way that is maybe can satisfy what Trump wants, what the Commerce Ministry wants. But there will be some caution and some precaution there by the companies. It'll slow down, kind of moderate some progress, but in the end, I think it'll be all systems go, because every company wants to innovate. No one wants to be left behind in AI.
And every nation will try their best to do that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jeffrey Towson, the whole premise of this policy guidance is that China, without stealing from the United States, without importing technology or material from the United States, is simply not capable of innovating, of making progress. And companies such as Huawei must have violated US export controls if it achieved any progress in terms of developing high-end chips. Do you see anything wrong with this premise?
I think when we're talking about AI, this is all new. I mean, most of these companies didn't, DeepSeek wasn't doing this 3 years ago, really. So, yeah, I mean, you could argue, you could make that argument in certain technological sectors where there's a long history of development and proprietary technology. We're not talking about that with an AI. I mean, China graduates about 2 million engineers per year. The US graduates about 200,000. I've worked with them, I've taught them. They're top tier. You've got tremendous brain power taking apart a new technological frontier. So, is it really surprising that, let's say, DeepSeek, which is a small little company, it's not big, did some tremendous innovation to come up with the LLM they did? Really stunning work. Is it surprising that the Ascend chip is starting to have performance ratios similar to the NVIDIA? No, none of that is surprising. So, yeah, I think this is throwing arguments against the wall and seeing if they stick or justifying something that we're going to do anyways. I don't listen to it. I mean, my argument would be there is a problem that this administration, and I'm American, so I'll criticize Americans. The problem they're grappling with is they're trying to create and enforce regulations outside of the United States. Which, how do you do that? Do you send the FBI into Malaysia? Do US judges issue orders that impact people in Indonesia? How are you going to enforce this and say who can use what chip in every little country, in every little company? And I think they don't have a mechanism for doing that, so they're kind of resorting to vague threats. If there was a real tactical mechanism to enforce this, that would be a big deal. I don't see it. But perhaps it may be a fool's errand to try and regulate the world and enforce it.
Well, they tried in the past, right? They tried with all kinds of sanctions, for instance, to pressure other allies to go with them, for instance, trade embargoes with China, with the DPRK, and it turned out countries don't follow suit because they have their national and foreign policy interests, which they will adhere to, they will serve. Actually, on exactly that point, one sentence in particular I'd like to highlight from the BIS policy statement, which says foreign parties acting contrary to U.S. national security and foreign policy interests may be added to the entity list, even where no violation of the Export Administration Regulation occurs. Let me go back to Professor Moretti. This sounds quite serious. I mean, when we talk about foreign parties, it means foreign companies, foreign governments, foreign persons. And how does the U.S. define that and how do they enforce that?
Well, if you make everything national security, then in reality, is anything national security? And what I mean by that is the more that you try to bang that drum and the more you try to instill fear and the more you try to throw out these veiled threats, as a couple of people have already mentioned, the global business community recognizes that in reality, outside of a lot of noise, this administration in particular has not been able to produce something that is going to truly indicate that something substantive is being done behind the scenes, or maybe has been planned and is now going to be released. For all the faults of the Biden administration, at least that administration, working with Congress, tried to produce some kind of legislation. Flawed legislation, probably. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Legislation that perhaps isn't realistic with the 21st century, but at least there was something done with an attempt of substance behind it. All we see here is if you don't like us, we're going to do something to you. We're not going to tell you what it is, but we've got big plans for you. And the idea mentioned earlier that the comment anywhere around the world sounded like it was written by a 12-year-old. Well, those kinds of threats sound like somebody who is trying to sound tough, trying to sound resolute, but in reality doesn't have a lot of ammunition in order to prevent the in this case Huawei, but certainly other companies as well, from advancing their interests, be they economic, be they political, be they technological, whatever they might be.
Well, NVIDIA chief Jensen Huang this week called U.S. export controls so far a failure. Export bans, Huang said, have spurred Chinese innovation, which means competition for his company. He says local companies are very, very talented, very determined, and the export control gave them the spirit, the energy, and the government support to accelerate their development. Professor Zhang, going forward, it seems that although the threats, the intimidation, the measures may be vague or specific, the spirit is the same, that the U.S. wants to contain, slow or moderate China's progress in high tech, in AI especially. How are businesses going? How can businesses in the U.S. and in China navigate this period of time and survive?
Right. I think I'm a little bit optimistic because I think the Chinese side is making breakthrough at a sufficiently fast pace. At some stage, it will overtake the US, and then all of this will go away. It tends to be the case.
But is it going to be bloodier in the process before that happens? Because that's like the nightmare that it is described, perceived to be the worst nightmare for the US.
It's perceived. That's the whole point. Once it gets there and then nothing happens, that perceived threat will subside. I think, for example, in other areas, in terms of the size of the economy, the size of the military, and everything, what China could potentially do in the worst case, if it goes crazy, is nothing like what it's actually doing. And the same will go with the AI and technology as well. So the hope, I think, is actually for Chinese companies to just push ahead quickly, and I think they will be making rapid progress in terms of chip making as well. So soon, once the the whole rationale is Huawei buying stuff, bypassing US export control through a third party, which is technically doesn't make sense because it's using an older technology that China can very well do itself. But next year or after, if a new generation of chip making equipment comes online in China, then that whole issue goes away. The whole embargo would just be meaningless, pointless, and then they'll be dropped.
Mr. Rao, do you agree that once this is fait accompli or a reality, I don't know whether I'm using the right word, then the US will be okay? Oh, it's not that bad, that China will move ahead. It probably will be more developed in certain areas of technology, and it's not the nightmare that the US has been fearing.
Well, I miss the context because I think it is a nightmare. I mean, Trump doesn't want that, and he's never wanted. He's been talking about, and he's been anti-China way before he became the president. He's been talking about, how U.S. is losing its edge. But I think what's going to happen here now is, as the battle lines are drawn and as the red lines become darker and darker, and every country is going to really buckle down and develop their own technologies and get their edge. So it might backfire what we are doing, what US is doing. It might push the other countries to become more self-reliant, more closed, develop their own technologies and get very competitive. So I think I don't think US wants that to happen. They want to control the flow of technology, want to maintain their edge to the extent they can. It's not easy, but US has an edge in terms of innovation, I would say. Yes, China can do it, but we have more broad-based technology know-how, so we have an edge. So they need to maintain that. So to the extent they can, they will. But I think what this whole thing is doing, this whole debate is pushing China to look more inward and develop their own solid strength.
The United States is in a situation of catch-22. If they contain China, they're going to lose. If they don't, they're probably going to, be overtaken even faster. Mr. Rao, very quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So I think the U.S. has to be careful. I mean, they're not dealing with someone who's not a very powerful player. I mean, China is a very powerful player. There may be at best maybe 1 or 2 years behind in terms of AI, if so as well. And they have all the natural resources that they need to all the rare minerals and all that they need for progress that U.S. needs. So I mean, China and U.S. are in a competitive race, very close race. So they need to work together. They need to be very careful not to infringe on each other. They might, in the end, hurt each other by really doing all these restrictions. So I don't know. At this point, I think this whole thing is very it's crazy. I'm glad they moderated what they said before, but they're not going to be able to contain China. They're moving full speed ahead, and U.S. needs to buckle up and stay competitive.
Jeffrey Towson, what is the right thing for the U.S. to do at this moment then, in your eyes?
Yeah, I think it's two things. Number one, this idea of containing, constraining the technological advancement of China is just hubris. Can't be done. So compete, get good, run fast. That's actually good for everybody, by the way. And then the thing they can do outside of that is we could, as the U.S. government, say this is what we accept Chinese companies can do within the United States because there's certain areas where we have strategic interests that we protect. That's totally reasonable. So domestic policy, domestic regulation, domestic enforcement it can make good sense in certain areas. But the global regulation and enforcement seems I don't think it's going to work out terribly well. But yeah.
Yeah,
I'm pretty optimistic, actually.
Why?
Because we see tremendous companies creating great things that help people, and the AI tools are fantastic. And the semiconductors are getting better and better. And does it really matter where they come from? If it's helping a hospital in Malaysia or Indonesia, does it really matter? I mean, that's not a question that regular people think about. So more advancement is generally better for everybody.
Professor Anthony Moretti, what is your suggestion then for the right way forward for the United States and from China?
I think I'd build a little bit off what Jeffrey just said, and I think the first thing I'd suggest is number one, keep your head down, keep focusing on the things you're good at, and that is creating products, creating cutting edge ideas, developing whether they're easy to understand or far too complex for even sometimes the most sophisticated people to understand. It doesn't matter. If it's good for a person in Malaysia, good for a person in Brazil, good for a person in the US, whatever country you're dealing with, that's what I would say do. So from
that
the business
be in contradiction with America First, for instance? Trump supporter would say.
And that was going to be my follow-up. The other thing I was going to say is tone down the rhetoric, because, while it may score political points at home, although I'm not sure it necessarily does, it does not score any points around the world.
Okay.
And the U.S. is still in a deficit area here. So it really needs to think strongly about what it says, to whom, and why.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Anthony Moretti, Professor Zhang Fan, Santosh Rao, and Jeffrey Towson for sharing with us your valuable insights. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.